Hi, this video will be for the volume by price study in Sierra Chart. This is one of the most commonly used studies in the entire software, and this video will be to show some of the most common settings and things that you should be aware of if you are using this study. And that is going to be it, so let's start. As you can see here, we have the main application window of Sierra Chart. We are connected to SC Data All Services for market data only. And I have one chart that has been unattached from the main application window, and it is set to the S&P 500 E-mini futures on a 15-minute price chart. So this video is going to be a basic introduction type of video to the volume by price, and we're going to cover some of the most important settings in the study. If at any time you need to reference instructions regarding this study, you should do that on the documentation for the study. The way we find it is by going to sierrachart.com. We can search for the documentation in the top right corner of the website. Let's say I do a search for volume by price. We can then see it is the first item selected, and here we are. This has all of the detailed documentation for the volume by price study, and you will also find similar documentation for the more complicated studies like numbers bars, TPO profiles, etc. So we'll have some step-by-step instructions here. Let's go on and talk about the study. So for the highest level of accuracy for this study, you need to make sure Sierra Chart is set to the tick-by-tick data configuration, and we need to check this in Trade Service Settings. Select File, then Data and Trade Service Settings, then select the Common Settings tab, and find the Intraday Data Storage Time Unit. This by default may not be set to 1 tick. In order to receive the highest level of accuracy for studies like the volume by price or numbers bars or any study that will use tick by tick data, you will set this, or you will need to set this to 1 tick. So just change it to that and apply all. And if you are changing this to 1 tick for the first time, you will need to re-download the data for all of your charts. So you'll select Edit, then Delete All Data and Download. So it will re-download the data using the new intraday storage time unit. And remember to do that for all of your charts. On this chart, we already have a volume by price study, but I will show you how to add one. So we need to select the Analysis tab, then select Studies, or we can press F6 on our keyboard if we're using Windows. So here we have the studies, and I've already added a volume by price study. I will remove it just to show you how to add it back. Here's the list of default studies in Sierra Chart. They are arranged in alphabetical order. If we scroll down to the letter V for volume by price and select it and then add it to our chart. Press apply and it will appear on the chart. This is the default setting for the volume by price study. To get into the settings of the study, we double click on the study, or we can choose settings right here. Now there's a few main inputs here that you need to know about. The first one would be the draw mode, which is how you want this volume profile to be drawn. There are 3 selections. The first one is just the volume profiles. The second one is lines and levels that are associated with the volume profile. In this case, the point of control value area high and low, and the volume weighted average price. If we select this, it will show them as lines only. And the third setting is those lines I just mentioned, as well as the volume profiles. So if I select that, you'll see how it adds these lines to the chart, like the point of control, for example. Let's set it to volume profiles just to keep it simple. One of the next important settings is the ticks per volume bar. So the lower we set this, the more accurate the volume by price will be. If we set it to 1, you can see that the tick increments get smaller and we have a more detailed volume profile. This is not always necessary to have it set to the lowest amount. In fact, if you are displaying a larger time frame or a historical chart like a daily chart, you would want to set this at a higher number, like 20 or 50, depending on the instrument you're charting. When this is set to 2, for every 2 tick price increment in our market, there will be 1 volume by price node in this case. If I do set it higher, you'll see how it groups them together. The next setting, which is the most important setting, is the volume graph period type. By default, it comes in as visible bars. This is one very common way to display a volume by price, and it is for the visible bars that you are displaying on your chart. If I scroll back the chart, you can see how it is showing us volume for these bars now. That's how a visible range profile works. So as the older bars go away from the chart, as new bars come in, the volume profile will only show us the most recent bars that are showing in our chart. There are many other ways that we can display the volume profile, including multiple profiles based on fixed time or bar count. We can have one period based on bar count, and I will show you a few examples of how these are used as we go through the video. The next settings here are independent to which selection you have chosen for the volume graph period type. For example, time period type for fixed time. This only applies if you have your graph period type set to a setting that is reliant on fixed time. So if I have this set to multiple profiles based on fixed time, now this setting for time period length for fixed time and time period type for fixed time would now become relevant. In this case, it is set to 1 day. I'll select apply, and then I will full screen this chart and show you how it has created now multiple profiles for every day. This is one example. I will open a trade DOM for the S&P 500 E-mini futures. And I've also opened up another trade DOM just to show you an example of a customized trade DOM that has 3 volume by price studies on it simultaneously. So if we go into the study settings of this trading DOM, we can see that there are 3 volume by price studies on the chart. And you can see that we are set to a single volume by price for 5 bars, which will be showing us the most recent volume for a specified time period on our trade DOM. And it will be removing the volume that is falling outside of that time period and keeping the most recent volume in the time period. The first thing you need to know is that even if this is a trade DOM, it still has a time period to it. In this case, it's set to a time period of 15 seconds. So just keep that in mind. Since I have these set to a single volume by price based on a number of bars, in this case 5 bars, it will show me 15 seconds times 5, because 15 seconds is the time period of our chart. So it will be showing us traded volume for up to 1 minute and 15 seconds. And it will always be showing us the most recent volume at price. And for every time the chart updates to a new bar, the oldest period gets removed off of the chart. So this is what I call a rolling volume by price on a trade DOM, and this is how it is configured. 1 period based on bar count, and the setting for number of bars for based on bar count is set to 5. There are other settings here that I will show you now. Since there are multiple volume by price here, I'm using a feature that allows us to have as many volume by price studies as we want that are aligned to the right side of a chart, and in the case of a trade DOM, onto the left side of the trade DOM, but they are right aligned, as you can see. The settings for that is first, right align volume bars, and then we need to scroll further down and find this setting, which is allow side-by-side profiles on right side. We need to choose yes. And then we need to finally go to this setting, align to far right, and make sure that is also set to yes. And we need to make sure that is selected for all of our volume at price studies that we want to be aligned in a group. And then they will align themselves based on the order that you've set them in. So for example, if I were to move this study down by 1, you can now see how the delta volume by price has now moved towards the right end of that. Regarding the width of these volume profiles, if you have multiple profiles, you would want them to be set to an appropriate width. In this case, I had set it to a width of 38%. So the maximum volume bar width type is set to the width of the window, and the maximum volume bar width percentage is set to 38%. If I did set it to 100, take a look at what would happen. You can see that it gets rid of all of the others. So if you are displaying multiple profiles next to each other, you need to make sure that they are set to occupy a reasonable amount of width so that you can see all of the numbers. The next setting we have here is the display volume in bars. So this is related to the text. In this case, I have the total volume being displayed for this specific study. We can also choose to display other things like ask volume minus bid volume, in other words, the delta. And there is also a setting to display the total volume as well as the ask volume minus the bid volume. In this case, I've actually created 2 volume by price studies, one of them for the total volume, the other one for the ask minus bid volume, only because I preferred how it looked visually on the chart. The next setting here is the volume bar calculation method, which in this case is set simply to just show the total volume. And then we have the bid volume and ask volume coloring method. In this case, it is set to none because I am not displaying separate colors for bid volume and ask volume. By default, if we take a look at this profile right here on the default setting that is there for the volume by price study, if we go into the study settings for that one, and we go and look at the setting we were just looking at here, bid volume and ask volume coloring method, we can see that it's set to separate bid ask volume coloring. If I set it to none, it will now remove the separate coloring, and then it will have one color for the volume profile. You'll have to experiment with different settings here to find the one that works for you. So I think that we can continue here with the way I had it displayed on this trade DOM because it is a good example. So again, this volume by price is set to 5 bars, rolling period. Further down here, we have certain settings regarding transparent draw style. Transparency is known for slightly higher CPU usage, so generally you would want to keep it off if you wanted to have the most responsive trade DOM or chart. Here we have settings regarding the value area and the point of control, as well as the volume weighted average price. So these settings here are related to extending these levels on the chart. If you require to have the point of control extended across the entire chart, you would choose to turn this on. You can also change the value area percentage here. The volume bars draw method is important. In this case, filled volume bars would be the default setting, but there's also a few other settings here. As you can see, I changed it to the outline only, and it took away the drawing there. I'll set it back to the filled volume bars since that is perfectly fine the way it is. If we continue to scroll down here, there's a few extra settings that are slightly more complex and not necessarily useful if you're just using the volume by price for basic purposes. But I would suggest you to read about them in the documentation if you wanted to learn about what these are, like the draw peaks and valleys feature. These color settings here allow us to display a more colorful profile based on the percentage of the point of control. I have not experimented with them, so we will not cover it in this video. Now, by default, we have turned on display data in the chart values window. I'll briefly show you what the chart values window is. We need to go to our chart select window and then the chart values window. Here we have kind of like a quote board for this specific chart or symbol. And if we scroll down, we can see here are the chart values for our volume by price studies. And because we have 3 of them on this particular chart, we're going to have the chart values showing for all of them. So there's volume by price chart values. There's the second one. and there's the third one. I will go back to the settings of this study again. As you can see here, the third volume by price on this trade DOM, I have named it POC, or point of control, and it is set to the same graph draw type, which is a single volume profile for a number of bars, except that for this profile, I've chosen 25 bars for the number of bars. I've also chosen to highlight the point of control. So if you look at this specific setting right here, highlight point of control, it is set to yes. So that way it is highlighting that right there. And I've also changed the colors in the subgraph settings to be sort of a gray faded color so that it doesn't make any bars there. It is also supported to display certain chart values at the top and the bottom of a volume by price study. This is useful if we're using something like a session profile and we want to see what is the total volume for the session. The way we can do that is, first we need to find this setting, which is show chart values on profile. We need to make sure that it is turned on. In this case, I'll set it to show chart values on profile with labels in a single row. I will apply that. Chart values position on the profile is set to the top of the graph, and we can put up to 4 chart values to be displayed on this profile. I will bring down the drop-down menu, and you can see these are the values that you can display here. So if we chose volume and applied that, we can see now that a number has appeared right here, and I will increase the text font size. By the way, this text font size applies to the chart values that you are displaying on your profile. So I will increase the text size to a bigger size, and you can see that it is increased there. So as you can see, the number is being cut off here. The reason for that is because these two profiles are taking precedence over this one, and the setting for the width of these particular profiles takes precedence over this one right here. Now, if I were to make the chart full screen, we can now see that the volume here for that particular profile is being displayed on the top of the profile. So that is a useful feature, which is show chart values on the top of a volume profile, for example. Useful for session profiles. The next thing that I think you should know, and I think we'll conclude the video with this, is regarding the font and text size for the volume by price studies. And the text and the volume profiles will be set to the font in the chart graphics settings. You can also adjust the size of the font for a particular volume by price study by adjusting it in the study subgraph settings for that volume by price study. So let me show you. If I go to this chart and I go to the graphics settings and I find the fonts, the chart text for this chart will also be the same chart text that is used for the volume by price studies. For example, if I do change the font of this chart, it will change the font of those volume by price studies as well. If I do change the size of the font, you can see that the size of the font is not affected. The way you change the font size for the volume by price study is by going into the study itself and then going to the subgraphs tab. Now we need to find the volume numbers, text, color, and size. And this is where we change the font size. One thing that is worth knowing about the text size for a volume by price study is that when you go into the subgraphs tab and you set the width size to a value of 0 and select apply, now when we use the interactive scale range feature in Sierra Chart, which is the feature of clicking and dragging on the price scale to either increase or decrease the width of the price increments, take a look at what happens to the font size of the volume by price there. So you can see when I make that thinner, it makes the text size smaller to match the size of each price increment. So that is what will happen when you set it to a value of 0. If you do not want it to do that, you can go back into the subgraphs tab of that particular volume by price, volume numbers, text, color, and size, and set it to the value of the text size that you want, and then it will not change when you change the vertical scale like that. Still an interesting feature to know about. This was an introductory video for the volume by price study in Sierra Chart. Please stay tuned for future videos regarding other functionality in the software. You can find these videos on sierrachart.com on the video library page. Thank you. Take care.